true believers, and welcome to episode 4 of the MovieMuse podcast, the superhero special. Don't forget that all our previous episodes are still available on YouTube and iTunes, and you can check out all our reviews and features at MovieMuse.net and on Facebook and Twitter. Our theme for this episode is everything and anything about superhero movies. Myself and the team will be discussing our favourite movies, stars, characters and franchises, as well as all the usual MovieMuse regular segments. But firstly, some introductions. Fully aware that with great power comes great responsibility, my name is Graham, Mr. Fantastic Mason, and I am your modest host for this episode. Sitting heroically with me in our virtual secret underground lair, we have a full complement of MovieMuse heroes. Dark, mysterious and brooding and playing with his gadgets, we have Simon Batman Burton.
Hello.
Next to Simon, we have the master of the Star Scepter and a local hero, our very own Matt, Captain Britain Corn.
Greetings, fellow heroes.
And across from me sits expert marksman, martial artist, starship pilot, genius and master strategist. Is there nothing this man can do? Gordon Starlord Sinclair.
Hello. Is there anything this guy can do?
Is that what you said?
Yeah.
That was a Freudian slip.
I think that's brilliant, though.
Is there anything this guy can't do?
That's what I was expecting.
So that's the introductions done. On with the show. For our first segment, giving you the latest updates from our website, MovieMuse.net, it's Matt.
MovieMuse.net, over the last few weeks we've featured an extensive awards season preview, including a summary of this year's Oscar nominations, some predictions about the awards season, and plenty of reviews of nominated films such as Mad Max Fury Road, Inside Out, The Revenant and The Danish Girl. We also have our regular Freeview Movies of the Week segment, where we look at the best films coming up on free-to-air television for the week. And there's also a feature on the top 10 most lovable movie robots, looking back at 60 years of delightful droids.
Thank you, Matt. Okay, fellas, next up, what have we been watching? This is the section where the Movie Muse crew talks about the most notable films that they've been watching since the last show. First off, we're going to go to Simon.
I've been through quite a few films, been having a bit of a movie sessions every night at the moment. The ones I've watched recently, I've got into Wreck-It Ralph, obviously with I love of video games, and I've thoroughly enjoyed that one. This is based on a fictitious arcade game called Fix-It Felix Jr., and it's about the interaction between the game characters inside the arcade, and they actually have their own lives. Once the game's over, they still live and go on and do bits and pieces. And Ralph obviously wants to not be the bad guy anymore. Everyone else seems to enjoy themselves. Everyone thinks Felix is brilliant. He gets down about it and then tries to think, well, I want to be the good guy for a change. And one of the guys says to him, oh, well, you need to go and get a medal. You come back here, we will treat you like Felix and think you're the good guy. So he goes off to sort that out. It causes mayhem. He ends up in other video games. He meets this girl who's a glitch in another game, and it's all about how it ends up helping her. And it's just very, very clever, and I really enjoyed it. Not just because of my love of video games, because you can recognise all the characters. It's just a very clever idea, and it's just done it really well. And one of my favourite animated films, I think. The Wreck-It Ralph, I'd give it 4.5 stars.
I agree with that, Simon. For the most part, it's a great film, and it is incredibly clever. In fact, they could easily make multiple films just out of that sort of central hub where the different video game characters from days gone by interact with one another. That was by far the most clever part of the film, and also the most fun. I think it does lose its way a little bit towards the end, where it gets a bit predictable, sort of Disney film where there's got to be a moral to the story, and you know, it all turns out all right in the end. I think they're already making a sequel to it, and I'd love to see more time spent in that world, because I thought it was really clever, like you said.
One of the best things that came out of it is the game itself. The game they released shortly after the film, or possibly just before, and it's a really good, fun little game that you could imagine in an 80s arcade being a real game. It feels like it's from the era that they're trying to pretend that it was, so I was quite impressed with that.
There's a guy who we all know, but the general public might not know, called Jim Bagley, who's actually trying to port the game back to original arcade hardware so that you can play it in a proper arcade machine, and when he finally gets around to finishing that, that'll be something that I think anyone who's a fan of old school arcade games will want to check out.
Okay, Simon, what was your other highlight?
Hateful Eight is my latest one that I watched.
And what make a man brave a blizzard, kill in cold blood? I'm sure I don't know. You'd be surprised what a man would do.
sort of typical Tarantino, but very enjoyable. It's gruesome in places, quite violent, but you would expect that from his films, to be honest. The story jumps from the time it's at, and then it goes back in time to show you the lead up to that, where it's got to. And it sort of jumps and drops around like that. And I found that really interesting. And you just never know what's going to happen next and who's going to do what. And you're just trying to work out the story. And it's just so many little twists and turns, and subplots are really, really clever. Quite a long film, but the time seemed to go quite quick, to be honest. And next minute it's over. I was like, oh, wow, is that really nearly 3 hours gone already? So I thought it was excellent. I really enjoyed it. Hateful Eight, I would give 4 out of 5.
I agree with that I was watching it and it definitely didn't feel like 2 3/4 hours, even though it's quite a slow film. There were a few things that I thought were a bit odd. I mean, for a film that 3/4 is just in one cabin, I'm not sure why he did a 70mm ultra widescreen version of the film, other than for it makes good press. I also really loved the start where it's outside and it's in the snow. I thought that was probably the best bit of the film, and he didn't keep that up long enough. So when it went to the confines of the cabin, I was a bit disappointed that happened so quickly. The thing that I love the most about the film is Jennifer Jason Leigh. I think she's absolutely fantastic in that film and adds virtually all of the comedy from the film. Absolutely loved her. She's brilliant. She's one of my favourite actresses.
She's very underrated, definitely.
Fantastic.
It's interesting you mentioned that widescreen format, because that's actually been quite controversial, I think, in this country, hasn't it? There's been a few cinemas that have refused to show the film at all because they weren't given the opportunity to show that wide version or something along those lines.
Yeah, it was Cineworld and Picture House, I think it was. They seem to have cut off their nose to spite the face there, though, don't you think? Because it was quite a successful film in the box office, I believe.
Gordon, what have you been watching since the last show?
My first film kind of fits with this month's theme. It's not actually a superhero film, but it's got a reference to superheroes.
When the world is in peril, when evil surrounds you, when danger...
It's called Paperman, and it's a film from 2009 about a novelist played by Jeff Daniels who moves to Long Island for the winter with his wife to try and get over writer's block. Lisa Kudrow plays his wife, and she's a surgeon working away all week, leaving him alone in the middle of nowhere with no company. The only company he's got is his imaginary friend, a superhero called Captain Excellent, played by Ryan Reynolds. So Jeff Daniels' character Richard then starts up a friendship with a 17-year-old girl, and his actions start getting more and more erratic. He starts throwing parties for teenagers and all sorts of mad stuff that you wouldn't have expected of a middle-aged man. And it's a tale about loneliness, and each of the main characters, Captain Excellent, the wife, the husband, and the young girl, are all going through their own issues with loneliness. But it's got some absolutely fantastic performances. Ryan Reynolds, who I can't stand the guy, but he's brilliant in this film, and you can see where he's dug some of the persona that he's using for the new Deadpool film from this. You know, he's got sarcastic delivery and really funny one-liners, and he actually steals the show in this film. And for someone that I normally would just immediately turn off if he's on, I was really impressed. Emma Stone, she was nominated for an Oscar for the blatantly average Birdman, where she played just a bog-standard performance, whereas here she's absolutely brilliant, and I'm surprised she got nominated for the last one, and this film kind of went under the radar. And Jeff Daniels is brilliant in everything. I really like Jeff Daniels, so fantastic performance. It's a really good story, but I was really surprised to see that it was absolutely murdered by the critics, but I really enjoyed it, and I'd say it was probably my film of the month, so I'll give that 4 stars.
I used to do things, remember? This isn't about you.
And I only know that I'll never be the boy one.
My other film is Anomalisa. Charlie Kaufman's one of my favourite screenwriters. He's got a really weird view of the world that's so skewed and unique that the films he makes kind of sit outside of normal genres. And this is his latest film. It's a stop-motion animation based on a play that he wrote of the same name. And it focuses on Michael Stone, who's a self-help author, staying in a Cincinnati hotel prior to giving a lecture.
What is it to be human? What is it to ache? What is it to be alive?
There are only 3 voice actors in the film. There's David Thewlis as Michael, Jennifer Jason Leigh as Lisa, and Tom Noonan plays everybody else. And Michael's life's become insular, he's distant to everyone around him, and they represent that in the film by everybody he meets, including his wife and his child, being portrayed by Tom Noonan in the same voice. But while he's in the hotel, he hears a different voice from across the hallway, and he meets up with Lisa, played by Jennifer Jason Leigh, and they strike up a relationship. This all happens in one night in this hotel room, but in true Charlie Kaufman style, everything starts to unravel and he starts to fall deeper into a pit than he ever was before he started. It was originally conceived as a 40-minute short, and they raised the money to make the film on Kickstarter. They got $400,000 on Kickstarter to launch the development, but it then picked up a proper production company who increased the budget to $8 million, which is still very low for this type of project. And the animation, it's actually really staggering, the animation in places. The characters look odd, but also move like they're real. So you'd almost think it was motion captured if you didn't know it was actually stop motion, because the movement is so realistic. And in particular, there's a sex scene in the film, and it's one of the most real and relatable performances of a sex scene you'll ever see. And all filmmakers should watch that to see how to make a sex scene. It's absolutely fantastic. It's up for Best Animated Feature at the Oscars this year, and I honestly don't think there's anything that can touch it. And if it doesn't get that Oscar, I'll burn the Academy down myself. Although I'm saying Paperman's my favourite of the month, and that's got 4 stars, I'm actually giving Anomalisa 4.5 stars.
I liked how you said the animation was staggering for a stop motion. I thought that was unintentionally very puntastic.
Yeah, that was completely unintentional, but I like it.
Thank you, Gordon. Next up, with what they've been watching lately, it's over to Matt.
There's a couple of recently released films that I've watched. Firstly, I went to see Creed at the cinema. I think we all know it's a sequel of sorts to Rocky, or a follow-on of the Rocky story would be more accurate. It's Michael B. Jordan starring as Adonis Johnson, who's the illegitimate son of Apollo Creed, and he wishes to follow in his father's footsteps in the boxing ring and approaches the long-retired Rocky Balboa to be his trainer. And it's a pretty familiar story. He goes to Philadelphia. He's had a bit of a rough upbringing, although he was adopted by Apollo Creed's wife, even though he's the illegitimate son of an affair that Apollo Creed had with a different woman, which was a bit of a strange start to the film, I thought, but I'm sure she had her reasons.
People die in the ring. Your daddy died in the ring. I don't know him. Ain't got nothing to do with me.
It's basically almost a remake, or a reboot at least, of the original Rocky, but it's got that sort of modern freshness of being set in modern times, a lot of use of smartphones, and there's even a joke about Rocky not really understanding what the smartphone does and all that kind of thing, showing Rocky to be a bit of an old-timer. I'm a bit surprised that Stallone, although I thought he was great in it, he's not really doing anything that he hasn't done in the previous Rocky films, and he's already won a Golden Globe for his performance in Creed, and he's also up for an Oscar for Best Supporting Actor. He was good, but I'm not sure he necessarily deserved that. But there's plenty of drama in the film, some tear-jerking moments. My wife was in tears throughout most of the film, in fact, especially some of the events that occur around Mr. Balboa. The thing that really struck me about it more than anything else was the intense, realistic boxing sequences. They put the camera inside the ring with the boxers, and you really see the punches connecting and the almost instant impact of someone getting smacked in the face. It's a lot more visceral and realistic than the original Rocky films were, which was shot more from a sort of television perspective outside the ring. What I felt about Michael B. Jordan's performance was that, just like Adonis in the film is looking to step out of his father's shadow, Michael B. Jordan's got to step out of Stallone's shadow a little bit, and he doesn't really manage it. The audience probably really cares more about what happens to Rocky in this film than what happens to Creed. But nonetheless, it was a worthy reboot of the Rocky story. There's already a sequel in the works. I believe it's going to come out in 2017, and that'll hopefully see Jordan step more to the forefront, as Rocky's time is probably going to come to an end at some point during these films. So not as good as Rocky Balboa in my opinion, but still very enjoyable, and 3.5 stars from me for that one.
I actually, surprise, surprise, think that Stallone deserves the nominations that he's getting. I think he plays the aging character really well, and he's believable as this is what Rocky would have turned into. He's still a down-to-earth everyman, and he's kind of taken on some of the cynical side that Mickey had in the early films. So the way he's blended Rocky's character and Mickey's character into this new Rocky the Trainer, I think he's brilliant. So I think it's well deserved his Golden Globe, and having watched all of the films for his competitors, I still think that he should get the Oscar.
And what else have you been watching, Matt?
The other film I watched that was particularly notable is a Big Game, which was made in 2014 but released in most parts of the world last year, directed by a Finnish director called Jalmari Helander. and it's actually the most expensive film ever made in Finland, though by Hollywood standards it's pretty low budget. It was $9 million approximately, and it tells a story of a 13-year-old boy called Oskari who is going through a tribal rite of passage where he must spend a night out in the Finnish wilderness and hunt a big prize to take back to his family to prove his manhood. Meanwhile, the President of the USA, played by Samuel L. Jackson, is flying over Finland in Air Force One, gets shot down by terrorists, and surprise, surprise, Oskari discovers the President's escape pod and must guide the President to civilization whilst being chased by terrorists and also a corrupt Secret Service agent.
Who are you?
You don't recognize me? The President of the United States?
It's a pretty cheesy 80s style action adventure film with some good sort of action set pieces, a couple of reasonable looking special effects sequences in it. It's not particularly big on plot, but it's just really good fun. It's a real reminder of those sort of 80s action films where they didn't take the plot too seriously and they just got on with it. Samuel L. Jackson's pretty good in a slightly unusual role for him because he's not a tough guy president. He's actually pretty pathetic and scared to be out of civilization in the wilderness and really needs the help of this little kid to guide him back to safety and all that sort of stuff. And the star of the film, though, is definitely this kid, Onni Tomila, who plays Oskari, and he's endearing, funny, and he's brave as well as the protector of the president and ultimately the hero of the film. He's really funny, and I'm not really a big fan of kids generally in films, but he's really likeable and definitely worth watching the film for. So I'm going to give that one 3 stars. A good 90 minutes of uncomplicated fun, better acting than expected, quite original action scenes, and perhaps most of all some fantastic scenery from the Finland wilderness.
Excellent. Okay, that sounds really interesting, that last film, certainly. Big Game, from what you say, Matt, it reminds me an awful lot of another Samuel L. Jackson film called The Long Kiss Goodnight, which also starred Samuel L. Jackson and is also set in a snowy wilderness. It had Gina Davis as his protector on this occasion rather than the young Finnish kid, but it does sound quite similar to that. But I really enjoyed that. That was a great action movie, and I think Big Game would be right up my street as well.
I think it would be too, Graham, and yeah, I like Long Kiss Goodnight. It's not really known as being a great film, is it? But I think it is a good film of that sort of genre, and people kind of maybe pass it by because it's not got a real big action star name attached to it.
Yeah. Thank you, Matt, for that. 2 films I've seen since the last episode, 2 notable films. The first one was Rise of the Planet of the Apes.
Meet Chimp 9. We gave him a gene therapy that allows the brain to create its own cells in order to repair itself. We call it the cure to Alzheimer's.
I don't think they've really made a decent Planet of the Apes film since the first one in 1968, and this is probably the best of the films that have followed. As the name suggests, it takes it back to the start of the apes taking over from the humans. James Franco, he works as a scientist in a lab, and they're trying to find a cure for Alzheimer's, which, in an amazing coincidence, his father happens to suffer from as well. And as usual in the movie, science goes wrong and an intelligent ape is created in the form of Caesar, who he adopts. And slowly Caesar begins to gain in intelligence and also aggressiveness as well. And eventually things start to go pear-shaped, and there's also a nasty virus thrown into the mix as well, which I haven't seen the next film, Dawn of the Planet of the Apes, but I presume that has some sort of effect. Overall, I thought it was an enjoyable film. It was very brief. It was only 90 minutes, which I've got nothing against in particular, but the film did feel a bit rushed. But it's generally an okay film. It's a decent thriller, and I enjoyed it, and I would give it 3 out of 5.
I loved it. It's taking it right back to the beginning. It's introducing a story that we haven't heard. No standout performances. Potentially, maybe John Lithgow. I thought he played the part very well, but he always does. But it was just a really interesting story and done really nicely. Now, what I would say is you definitely should watch the next one. Which way round are they? Is Rise next or is Dawn?
No, Rise is the first one, which I watched, and Dawn of the Planet of the Apes is the next one.
See, that's what always confuses me, because surely you rise after Dawn.
That's what I thought. I thought, is the next one going to be called Breakfast of the Planet of the Apes?
Yeah, you definitely should watch that, because it's not giving anything away to say that's when the apes start to talk. It's brilliant. Those 2 films are fantastic, and I can't wait for the third in that trilogy.
I pretty much agree with that. I really enjoyed both of them. Andy Serkis is probably the standout with his motion capture performance of Caesar. He's a genius at that stuff anyway. Everything he does, well, with the possible exception of Supreme Leader Snoke, is pretty memorable. I'm a real big fan of post-apocalyptic type stuff, but you don't often see what causes the apocalypse. So I like the bit at the end of it where they show the virus spreading across the world into various places. Just little things like that were really cool. The follow-up's probably even better, but I do think the first one was excellent. And a bit maybe underrated, I think, as well.
The other film I watched, it's kind of one and a bit films I've watched actually, because I bought Robocop, the remake, in a charity shop.
I'm the first of my kind. Half man, half machine. I was created to rid the streets of crime. But the people who built me had different plans.
What's bigger than a hero? Dead hero.
It's time to inform them. Their plans have been canceled.
Dead or alive, you're coming with me.
Thank you for your cooperation.
Robocop.
I thought it was worth a pump for £1, and after watching about 15 minutes of it, I felt compelled to take it back to the charity shop. Obviously I won't because it was for charity, but I do feel that even for £1 it wasn't great. So I gave up watching the remake of Robocop after about 20 minutes and instead watched the original Robocop.
We get the best of both worlds. The fastest reflexes modern technology has to offer, onboard computer-assisted memory, and a lifetime of on-the-street law enforcement programming. It is my great pleasure to present to you Robocop.
Which I must have seen countless times, but I had great fun watching that again, all the classic scenes and lines from the original film in 1987, and yeah, that was good, and I would give the original Robocop 5 out of 5, because I just think it's a great movie.
So what you're saying is, with the other one, you wouldn't buy that for $1?
Oh, bloody hell, that was my
I knew you...
I was thinking that one as well.
I'll team up. I don't know what it was about the remake. It just seemed like a glossy, normal Hollywood thriller, whereas Robocop back in 1987, or when I saw it on video, it was just such a kick in the nuts, so different from everything else. Whereas the new one, it's just, well, it's only rated 12, so obviously the violence in it is not like the original, and it just failed to excite me in the first 20 minutes, and I couldn't see it happening again, and it gave me a yearning to watch the original, so that's what I did instead.
Yeah, the remake, it's not edgy in any way, shape or form, is it? Like I say, it's very polished. The thing I really didn't like about it was when they turn Joel Kinnaman into Robocop, there's virtually nothing of the human part of him left at all. I know there wasn't much left of Murphy in the original one, but he's just like a human head on a robot body when it was just really odd. But yeah, it was instantly forgettable for the most part. The original, on the other hand, I totally agree, is a 5 out of 5 film.
Yeah, I think you both picked up on it, that it's just a glossy, putting a shine on something that the whole point was that it wasn't shiny. Robocop was a B movie. It was made to look like it was rough and raw, and they just got everything wrong with the remake. I agree with you guys, 5 stars for the original, but I wouldn't even watch the remake with Simon's eyes.
What a random comment that was.
At least it's only my eyes you're watching it with.
Simon, have you seen the remake of Robocop?
No, don't intend to, not interested. I saw a trailer of it and I thought, that's a load of old shit, so I'm not bothered, I'm not going to watch it. But the original, yeah, absolutely amazing, love it. I got it for my birthday in 87, put it on video, and I've still got the video somewhere, and I'd still watch it again and still love the film, so yeah, 5 out of 5.
You must have been the only person who was actually old enough to watch it when it came out.
Oh, I was way old, yeah, I was
completely.
Years before that, yeah.
Excellent, thank you guys. That's what we've been watching lately. Okay, next up, guys, we've got Coming Soon, where we go around the MovieMuse crew and talk about the movies that are coming up that we're looking forward to. First of all, Gordon, what are you looking forward to in particular?
The film I'm looking forward to is 999. The Code on the Street is never black and white. It's an American heist thriller directed by the Australian John Hillcoat, who previously directed the really, really good Western called Lawless. I don't know if any of you saw that with Tom Hardy, which was really, really good. And he also did a computer animated film for one of my all-time favourite video games, Red Dead Redemption. So, he's got quite a good pedigree. And there's a really good cast attached to it as well. It's got Casey Affleck, Aaron Paul, Woody Harrelson, Kate Winslet, and my current obsession, Gal Gadot, or Gadot, I don't know how you're supposed to say it, but she's the girl from Fast and Furious, but she's also the new Wonder Woman. And the score sounds pretty cool too. It's described by the composer as raw electronics and a saxophone. Now, how cool does that sound?
Anything with a saxophone is cool.
Exactly.
It's cool.
So the story follows a group of criminals and corrupt cops who are being blackmailed by the Russian mafia, and the only way to get out of the predicament is to carry out an almost impossible bank job. So they hatch a plan where they're going to kill a rookie cop, and whilst the rest of the force are dealing with the officer down call, which in America is the 999, the other half of the team will pull off the heist. But as you'd expect, it doesn't quite go to plan, and Casey Affleck, who plays the rookie cop, his character refuses to die and all hell breaks loose. So it sounds really good, and I love a good heist movie almost as much as a good revenge movie, so mixing the two together in this sounds right up my street.
Simon?
One that's caught my attention only because I was a sort of fan of the TV series when it was out a long, long time ago in the 70s. And there's a film of Dad's Army coming out, and I was absolutely gobsmacked when I saw that. I think it's nothing they're not going to make a film of these days. I'm going to be interested to see what it's about. It's obviously still a wartime comedy, and it's even got Ian Lavender in it, who's about the only one left out of all the original Dad's Army cast who's still alive. Bill Nighy's in it, and Toby Jones, the usual Michael Gambon, people like that. So I'd be interested just to see what they make of it, really. My hopes for something like that are not going to be high, but you never know. It could prove to be a lot of sort of like a quirky British film. So that's one I'm sort of might keep an eye on.
Thank you, Simon. The film I recently saw a trailer for that I'm looking forward to on Blu-ray is called The Program. It's a film about Lance Armstrong, the disgraced cyclist. It's got a very good tagline, which initially attracted me to it. I saw the trailer and there was a picture of it on IMDb. The tagline is Champion, Hero, Legend, Cheat, which kind of summed it up a little bit. It's about an Irish journalist who follows Lance Armstrong because he becomes suspicious that he's using illegal substances or banned substances to enhance his performance. Lance Armstrong is played by Ben Foster, and other than Ben Foster, the only other actor I'd heard of is Dustin Hoffman, who's in it, but I don't think he has a particularly large role in it. And it essentially follows this journalist as he tries to uncover evidence of Armstrong's undoing. I think it's a very interesting story. I think doping is something that cycling in particular has cleaned up over the last few years, and obviously based on true events as well. So I'm looking forward to that. That's what I'm looking forward to. Matt, over to you.
Okay, well, I get the trailer pick this time around, so I'm picking a trailer for a film that's being released imminently in the USA, 26th of February, but not till the 28th of March in the UK, which seems a bit strange because it's a biopic celebrating a British sporting legend, a Rocky-esque story of determination to beat the odds combined with classic British underachievement. It is, of course, the trailer for Eddie the Eagle.
As we embark on a new era for sport, it's an opportunity to discover a new kind of athlete.
Okay, hands up, that was my fault. For as long as I can remember,
Champion!
it has been my ambition to become an Olympian.
Eddie, you are not an athlete!
What I want,
You're right, I'm never going to go to the Olympics. I'm going to go to the Winter Olympics.
You will never be Olympic material.
Let's do it.
I really need a coach.
You do realize the time to start jumping is when you're 5 or 6.
What would you know about it anyway?
Bronson Peary, 1968 champion.
How come I've never heard of him?
They kicked him out.
He was disrespectful of the sport.
Just after a few tips.
Give up. There's one for free.
Could you give me a push, please?
A push?
He's a lot higher than I expected it to be. Oh, wait!
Don't bend your leg.
You're not going to give up, are you?
If I'm going to do it, I was kicked off every team I was ever on before I even got a chance to prove myself. That's why I need my own moment.
It's a world that doesn't want to know you.
So what's new?
I know what it's like to be written off. I can get you a moment. It's going to hurt like hell.
We have no desire to be associated with ludicrous antics
I think a little bit of weed came out.
and defeat.
You're a disgrace to the sport.
Really?
Personal best! And we're a disgrace!
I love proving people wrong. I have to do this.
You got more spirit than any of those other jumpers out there.
Here he comes, Britain's Eddie Edwards.
You're Eddie the Eagle.
Just fly. Eddie's off. Can he pull off the impossible?
Simon, you've watched the trailer. What do you think?
Yeah, it looks good. I didn't know Hugh Jackman was in it, so it was quite nice to see someone new. As you expect, it's obviously the rise of Eddie the Eagle's British hopeful in the ski jump. From what's in the trailer, it looks like there's some good humour in it, and the guy looks a lot like him, and it really captures what you would think how Eddie rose up to the point of representing Britain in the Olympics. So it looks good fun.
Gordon?
Yeah, the trailer looks excellent. It's funny you say that the guy playing Eddie looks like him, because the actor, Taron Egerton, was actually in Kingsman: The Secret Service as this young, slim, good-looking hero guy, and looks nothing like Eddie the Eagle in reality. So they've done a brilliant job of kind of dumbing him down to Eddie's look with his jam jar glasses. I love the humour that's in the trailer. It looks like there's a lot of fun and a lot of excitement in there. We all know the story. We know he doesn't win the Olympics, but it seems like they've gone with the British view of everyone loving a trier rather than the American view of everyone loving a winner. So it's one of the films of the year for me that I'm most looking forward to.
I think it's got a lot of potential, this movie. It's obviously they've played it for laughs, which I think is important. There's a strong tradition of successful movies based around no-hopers. For instance, Cool Runnings, which was a big hit as well, about the Jamaican bobsleigh team, which is obviously a similar sort of theme. It seems to have a very unique British look and take on it, as of course it should do. I'm intrigued to know how they end the movie. Obviously you don't see that in the trailer. Really, I would like to see how they give it a big grandstanding feel-good finish, which I think this sort of movie, it's inevitable, will have. I agree with you guys, it looked really good, and I'm very much looking forward to this one. Matt, it was your pick. I presume you like the look of this film as well, then?
Yeah, absolutely. I think surprisingly, because when you hear they're making a movie about Eddie the Eagle, anyone who knows the guy, and we all grew up in the era where he became famous, you know, he wasn't a winner, he wasn't a super sportsman. You can see from the trailer he's just an average bloke who just thought, you know what, I want to be an Olympian, let's try and become an Olympian in the one thing that no one else is doing for this country. And he wasn't successful at it. I think he probably finished something like 20 metres behind anyone else in last place. He was scared of heights, I believe, as well, so he's a proper loser. I think the reason he became a hero was because he was a loser, because if he'd won, we'd have probably gone, oh, he's a winner and he's just smug about it. It seems a very British trait that we applaud the trier more than we applaud someone who's actually good at something. So yeah, it looks good. It's got some pretty big names associated with it as well. It doesn't look like a low-budget British comedy, you know, that you might think of. It's got Hugh Jackman in it, who's obviously a big name. Christopher Walken's in it as well, and it's directed by Dexter Fletcher, who's, you know, got a bit of credibility, and produced by Matthew Vaughn, who produced things like the X-Men film. It's not just a low-budget Britcom, it's actually, and I think it shows by it being released in the US before the UK, people have got high hopes for this, as have I.
On to the main topic of this episode, and as I mentioned earlier, today's show is all about the worthy superhero movie. Up until the late 70s, the superhero movie remained relatively dormant. Serial shorts such as The Green Hornet and Flash Gordon were immensely popular in cinemas, while The Adventures of Captain Marvel is the earliest example of a Marvel comic big screen adaptation. Batman soon followed in the 30s and 40s, but it wasn't really until the 1970s, with the release of Warner Brothers' feature film Superman, that we first started to see the genre appear regularly on the silver screen. A sequel to Superman inevitably appeared, as did a third film which took the series into a more comedic zone, and the less said about Superman 4, the better. Maybe it was the triple whammy of Superman 4, Supergirl and renowned flop Howard the Duck, but in any case, it wasn't until 1989 that the next big superhero movie turned up, and it just happened to be another DC property, Batman. Tim Burton's dark and gothic take on The Dark Knight was a massive hit, but this series unfortunately followed the path of the earlier Superman movies. When Michael Keaton and Burton himself both left the franchise, things took a nosedive, with Val Kilmer in Batman Forever, and in particular George Clooney and Arnold Schwarzenegger hamming it up in Batman and Robin. Meantime, Marvel properties remained strangely low-key. There were several television series and TV movies. The legendary 1994 Fantastic Four movie, mired in financial issues and an unreleased cinematic mess, kind of sums up the Marvel movies up until this point. Of course, there were other comic book heroes brought to the screen, including The Crow, starring the ill-fated Brandon Lee, Image's Spawn, and Dark Horse's comedic The Mask, and original properties as well, such as The Rocketeer and Darkman. Yet strangely, the biggest melting pot of superheroes, Marvel, remained relatively untapped until the year 2000, when Bryan Singer brought the X-Men to the silver screen. This epic battle between man and mutant was far from perfect, but was slickly produced and boasted an excellent cast. More importantly, it took just shy of $300 million at the box office, ensuring a steady stream of marvellous movies would follow. Sam Raimi and Tobey Maguire brought a Spider-Man in 2002, Vampire Hunter Blade, Blind Superhero Daredevil, and the Hulk also got outings in 2003. Of course, this massive expansion meant blips were inevitable, and these were provided by the aforementioned Daredevil and Elektra. Buoyed by this, a return of the two big DC properties was overdue, and in 2005 we received Batman Begins, and a year later Superman Returns. But the period was to prove a nadir for Marvel, as both X-Men The Last Stand and Spider-Man 3 signalled a seeming end to their franchises. The current mass of Marvel superhero movies can be traced back to 2008 and the release of Iron Man, which is generally regarded as the start of the current Marvel universe. Iron Man was greatly assisted by its portrayal by Robert Downey Jr., and the film was a huge success that was nevertheless eclipsed by the runaway popularity of Batman's sequel The Dark Knight. So far this decade has seen Marvel dominate the superhero schedules with separate franchises for Captain America, Thor, Iron Man, Spider-Man, Fantastic Four and the Avengers themselves. But DC is fighting back. Man of Steel may not have been everyone's cup of tea, but Batman vs Superman and Suicide Squad look to be redressing the balance. And while there are still disappointments, it's plain to see that there's plenty of thrills and spills and action to come. So first off, we're going to go round the MovieMuse crew and find out our top superhero movies. So first of all, with his first choice, it's Gordon.
Okay, the first film that I'd call out is Spider-Man.
Everyone is meant to make a difference, but for me, the choice to live an ordinary life is no longer an option.
As a kid, Spider-Man was always my favourite superhero, so when they brought out a proper Hollywood action film of Spider-Man, I was really excited, and I really wasn't disappointed with it at all. It brilliantly tells the story of how Spidey came about. Tobey Maguire's the perfect choice as the geeky kid next door, unlike the awful casting of Andrew Garfield in The Amazing Spider-Man, who works fine as Spidey, but he's just a world away from the everyman Peter Parker that we expect. Even the supporting cast, James Franco, Willem Dafoe, Kirsten Dunst, they're all great, and you get a real feel of the turmoil that Peter feels when his uncle's murdered. I think technically the second film in Sam Raimi's trilogy is better, but the original will always be my favourite, as it brought to life my favourite childhood superhero without treating the audience like kids.
Any other fans of the original Spider-Man?
Yeah, I've seen the first two. Good story. He really does play Spider-Man excellently. Good action. The scenes, the city, everything is as you expect from Spider-Man transferred from the comics. So yeah, I'm a good fan of those. I haven't seen them for a while, but I did enjoy them when I did see them.
Matt?
I really enjoyed the first Spider-Man, but if I can move on to my favourite superhero film is Spider-Man 2.
I believe there's a hero in all of us, even though sometimes we have to give up the thing we want the most.
It's an excellent continuation of the story and the characters from part one. It's got some really good action scenes in it, particularly the subway train scene, which is, despite being a subway train, is actually above ground, but where he's having to stop the train with the webs and the human characters in the train all help him when he's knackered at the end of it. It's got some really good funny and dramatic moments. It doesn't take itself too seriously, but it's also got some building of the relationships between the different characters, particularly obviously Peter Parker and Mary Jane, and also Peter Parker and Harry Osborn, the character played by James Franco. And I think one of the reasons I like it the most, it's one of the only superhero films where the hero actually questions whether it's worth being a hero. He actually thinks about, why am I doing all this? It's got a bit more humanity about it, a bit more realism for the situation of someone who would be a superhero than a lot of the films really deal with.
Simon, what's your first choice?
I'm going to be honest, I'm not a big superhero fan. They're not a big thing in my life. I never really into them when I was a kid, but Superman is the one I'm going to choose.
Even though you've been raised as a human being, you are not one of them.
I went to see that at the cinema, and at that time, when I was about 9 years old, it was obviously a big thing to go to the cinema, and this was Superman, so everyone liked Superman, and I really enjoyed it. I think Christopher Reeve, he looked the part, he played Superman very well. You know, Lex Luthor as Gene Hackman, a good criminal, enjoyable, a bit of love interest with Margot Kidder as Lois Lane, the good plot line, there's action, Superman saves the day, which is what you always want to see in a Superman film. It was excellent. Obviously, it was critically acclaimed at the time. It was the first really copy of the big superhero films that came out, and it sort of pushed that genre back into the public eye and took it from there.
I think the original Superman is sometimes a bit overlooked these days. I don't think people quite realise what a big thing it was back in the day. It was really up there with Star Wars, I think, at the time, the attention that it got and the box office. The plot is a little bit predictable, I think, because Superman's told not to do one specific thing by Jor-El, and of course he ends up doing that. But otherwise, I think it's a really, really solid film, and I've always thought it's a bit of a shame, other than Superman 2, that there's not really been any decent Superman films since.
In its day, it was brilliant, and it was a massive film, and it was a blockbuster like Star Wars. But going back and watching it now, it's a bit of a slog. It hasn't held up like other films have. They're just not as accessible as a lot of other films. But I completely agree, it's a shame we've never had any better since, because I quite enjoyed Superman Returns, but Man of Steel, God, that was dull.
One thing none of you have mentioned about Superman is the score, which obviously was done by John Williams. That Superman theme, if you sing even the first few bars of it to somebody, they know where you're going with it. You know, it's such a memorable theme, and one of the most standout things about the film. I think, as Gordon said, it's aged a little bit, but I do like that scene where he turns the world back the other way. It's so ludicrous, and yet, you know, it's Superman, so he could probably do that.
But why didn't he do that every time something goes wrong?
Okay, my first choice is Iron Man. I mentioned it earlier as it was the movie that's generally recognised as the start of the current Marvel era. I think Iron Man is probably one of my favourite characters, played brilliantly by Robert Downey Jr., who I think just fits the role perfectly. The character of Tony Stark certainly has always been an interesting character to me, never a cut and dry superhero. And essentially at the start of the movie, Tony Stark is an arms dealer. He's captured by some militants who are using his own weapons against him, and he's imprisoned, fortunately with a very brilliant scientist who can help him heal his heart, because he's got a piece of shrapnel in his heart, and they build an artificial heart for him, and of course the suit which helps him escape. Because it explains the origin, it moves along a really good lick, and it's got not really any decent villains in it, but it tells the story really well. And it also obviously has an excellent performance by Robert Downey Jr. at the centre, which kind of drives the movie onwards. And at the end of it, in contrast to most superheroes, there's a lot of speculation about who Iron Man is, and he quite gleefully reveals, displaying his narcissistic side, that he is Iron Man, and sets up for what unfortunately is a rather disappointing sequel in Iron Man 2.
Robert Downey Jr., I don't think anyone would have chosen him to play Iron Man, and yet his kind of damaged sort of persona that's his real persona seems to fit Iron Man quite well. And I do love the way that he doesn't care that everyone knows he's Iron Man. He's like, I'm Iron Man, just see if you can come and get me. But you're right, all the Iron Man films lack a really decent villain. That's probably the only failing of them, in my opinion.
Rob DJ is just fantastic as him. If you compare Iron Man 1 to Batman Begins, in Batman Begins you've got this very, very wealthy man who becomes a superhero, and he has to pretend to be a playboy. So pretend to be a playboy so I can hide the fact that actually I'm a superhero at night. And Iron Man's the complete opposite of that. He is that playboy all the time, and then he just goes and does the high-tech, full robot suit, and he's kind of the anti-Batman. I absolutely loved the difference between those two characters. It made a character I didn't care about actually worth watching, so it was a brilliant film.
On to our next choice then. Gordon, what do you have for us next?
Well, as Spidey was my favourite superhero as a child, as an adult, it's definitely Batman. And Christopher Nolan can take most of the credit for that, I think.
You've changed things. Forever.
Tim Burton's dark vision of Batman was a bit too pantomimey for me, but when Nolan took over, he threw out the rule book, made a great dark thriller that just happened to feature a man in a cape. The Dark Knight is absolutely the best of the three in his trilogy, but the trilogy taken as a whole is far and away the best superhero movie series that anybody's ever made, as far as I'm concerned.
Thank you, Gordon. I presume we're all fans, are we?
Yeah, The Dark Knight would have been my second choice. I do like Batman Begins, and I found Dark Knight Rises a bit tedious, and also I found Bane a really terrible villain in that film. But The Dark Knight's almost perfect, as you say, as a dark, chaotic thriller, and also a bit of a superhero movie. But I don't find Batman to be much of a superhero anyway. He's basically just a man with some handy gadgets. Obviously, a lot of the plaudits went to Heath Ledger for his performance as the Joker, which I think maybe got a bit overrated because he died, and so they gave him the Oscar.
I disagree. I think
I thought you probably
fantastic performance, and he portrayed that chaotic character with pure chaos.
It was great. I just wonder whether he would have won the Oscar if he'd still been alive.
His performance probably deserved it, but they would never have given Best Supporting Actor Oscar to a Batman film if he hadn't have died. I think you're right.
The only other thing that I find a bit tiresome about the Nolan Batman trilogy is Christian Bale's necessity of doing this voice when it's Batman. It just gets worse and worse as the 3 films go on.
I know you mean ignored me within 10 minutes of the film starting. I was like, what's the matter with his voice? Why is he talking like that as Batman? But that's obviously what he does.
Okay, Simon, what's your second choice?
I'm going to be very predictable with my second film. It's going to be Superman 2.
Superman 2. The adventure continues with the 3 villains from Krypton. Each one with the same powers as Superman.
Superman 2 is my favourite of the 3. This one, he's up against 3 antagonists who are at the same level as he is, and he's got to come to terms with that and how to deal with it. I think Terence Stamp as General Zod, obviously he's the sort of cool, typical British villain type character, and I just think Superman's got a different challenge here. It's not just about saving humans, it's about facing up to 3 super villains on his level. I just think it's that bit better than the first one, though I think most people remember the first one as it's the original.
I would agree, I'm a big fan of Superman 2 as well. I think the way it introduces the other characters, it's a bit forced, although it is obviously signposted in the first film. The only thing that I always found a bit disappointing about the film is that Superman goes through this process where he becomes mortal and we're told it's irreversible, and then at the end of the film it's reversed. So that's kind of ruins that bit for me.
I think what you were referring to there, Graham, is what the internet people now call a plot hole.
Yes, well, I think they probably knew what they were doing, but yeah, it's a bit of a plot hole.
General Zod's probably one of the classic sort of villains from superhero films, certainly the early ones. But those 3 characters are all great. I can't remember what the other 2 are named. I enjoy Superman 2, and it's probably the best one of the bunch, but I don't have anything more to say about it.
Okay, my second choice is Watchmen, Zack Snyder's filming of the cult graphic novel, which I also love. I've read it when it came out in the 80s, I think. A lot of people don't like this movie. A lot of people are big fans of the graphic novel and think that he basically butchered it. I certainly would take umbrage with that because I think the film is excellent. It's kind of a darker take on superheroes. They're not really superheroes in the traditional sense of it. None of them have any superpowers. They're just basically people in suits. There's a lot of gore in the film, and it's not really your typical superhero film, but it does change the ending of the graphic novel, which I think was probably a good idea because I don't think that the ending of the graphic novel would have suited the film particularly well. Anyone else seen The Watchmen?
Yeah, I enjoyed The Watchmen. I wouldn't rate it as one of my favourites, but it's certainly an interesting take on the superhero film. A friend of mine at work rates the director's cut of Watchmen as the best film ever made, so it's probably worth a watch if you enjoyed the non-director's cut.
I need to check that out then, yeah, I haven't seen that.
I watched Watchmen, but I found it a little bit boring, to be honest. It's just another overlong, dark and brooding rather than stuff going on.
It does sag a little bit in the middle, but then you have the prison breakout scene, which kind of perks it up a bit in the middle, I think.
I do like the woman in it. I can't remember what her name was, but the woman in this kind of skin-tight yellow and black suit, she was good.
You old dog, you.
You know that you said none of them have got superpowers. What about that guy who's got like the bandage over his face and his face keeps changing?
Yes, I would say there is one, possibly 2 proper superheroes in the movie. You've got Dr. Manhattan. He was trapped in some scientific experiment and had all his molecules sent to all parts of the universe and then was kind of reassembled as this nuclear being. And Rorschach is the guy that has a face mask that's constantly shifting all the time, but whether he has any extra abilities in addition to that, I don't think so. I think just all the characters in it are just at the peak of physical condition or very good fighters or whatever, or have gadgets. Now we're going to move to the opposite end of the spectrum. I'm going to let Simon go first with his least favourite character or superhero movie.
Out of mine is Superman 3, purely because it just went over the top on this comedy stuff.
Alexander Salkind presents Christopher Reeve and Richard Pryor. Watch the trees. As you've never seen them before.
The opening sequence with the guy out of the John Smith's advert and Pamela Stevenson and all the thing that like a domino effect goes on and on was just unnecessary nonsense. I don't know what on earth that's all about. I don't understand what the comedy element of all this one was. I do like Richard Pryor as a sort of protagonist who sort of just falls in with the bad guys, doesn't really want to be doing that, but just wants to get loads of money and just live his life. Robert Vaughn, I think he plays the villain Ross Webster pretty well. He's not Gene Hackman, he's not Lex Luthor, which is what you expect. Hackman couldn't obviously do this one and they've had to come up with someone else. But it just gets silly and it just goes on into a sort of slapstick by the end of it, and on the whole it's just a bit of a mess. The only one thing I do like about it, there's a bit where he's approaching Ross Webster's fortress in the mountains, and it turns into like Atari did the graphics for this, which is probably good graphics for its time. But it plays this game and it has a lot of the Atari sounds in the background, and then the missiles coming, and it's like a video game. They're playing it as in a video game in the lair. But on the whole, it's not the worst film in the world. It's my least favourite, obviously, of the three, and I just think it just sort of waters down Superman and what he's all about.
I'm actually starting to wonder how we ever became friends. I think I threw up a little bit when you said that opening sequence is pointless. That is classic cinema. That opening sequence to Superman 3 is one of my favourite pieces of cinema.
I don't see the point of it in the Superman film, but that's fair enough.
I would say as well that although you're right and agree, Simon, that I think the comedy is overplayed, it actually has one of the most terrifying sequences in a Superman movie. Towards the end, when the supercomputer's taking over, the bad lady in it, she's kind of pulled into the supercomputer and it starts pulling metallic parts all over her. And it's just a really creepy, horrible scene. So actually, in amongst all these comedy bits, there's suddenly this really serious and creepy scene that kind of is a bit at odds with the rest of the movie.
That bit is scary. All the cables go around, and then it's, as you say, it puts all the metal plates over her face and all over her body, and she comes out like a cyborg.
That's the only scene I remember from that film, and probably for the reasons you've just explained, it was fairly terrifying at the time.
Yeah, agreed. Gordon, can you tell us about one of your least favourite superhero movies or characters?
Well, I haven't really got much to say about them, so I've got three, so I'll just give you all three. Firstly is Avengers Age of Ultron, all CGI and no substance. Then we've got Man of Steel, all brooding and no action. And then Iron Man 2, which is just a collection of rock music videos rather than a film. I could have picked either of the Ghost Rider films as well, because they're all so awful. And that's it, really. Not much to say about them, because they don't deserve it.
Bit harsh on Avengers Age of Ultron. I didn't think it was the greatest film by any means, but this is something that's common to a lot of superhero films now. I find myself enjoying the bits where they're not doing superhero things more than the bits where they are. So the action sequences left me completely cold, all the CGI as you mentioned, and yet the bits where, for example, Iron Man, Thor and the other characters are all trying to pick up Thor's hammer was actually one of the best bits in the whole film.
Best scene in the movie, yeah.
Please be my guest.
Come on. Really?
Yeah.
Clint, you've had a tough week. We won't hold it against you if you can't get it up.
I actually think the comedy in that film is quite good. And I think there's a review of it on the website. And I really liked the comedy. And some of the visuals are fantastic. This floating city or whatever it was looked beautiful. But I just found the film didn't have anything going for it other than bits that, little side bits rather than the actual main course. I just didn't really take to it.
I will be reinstituting Prima Nocta. Be right back. Are you even pulling? Are you on my team?
Just represent, pull.
All right, let's go.
Thank you, Gordon. Matt, do you have any particular films you dislike in this genre?
Yeah, there's a few. Quite predictably, I'm sure someone was going to say it sooner or later, Batman and Robin was obviously an absolute travesty. We don't need to go into the details why they are numerous.
Mm-hmm.
Daredevil was also pretty awful. I remember going to the cinema to see that, and there's very few films I feel that I've been to the cinema to see and felt like I've wasted my money, but that was definitely one of them. But I think my least favourite superhero film, almost ironically given what we've said earlier, is Spider-Man 3, because it was such a fall from grace after the first two films, and where they went wrong with it was just too many villains. It's like, oh, he's got the black suit, and the black suit's now on someone else, and that's Venom, and then they've got the Sandman, and then they've got the Green Goblin 2, Norman Osborn's son, and he's a baddie, but then he's a goodie, and then he dies, I think, if I remember rightly, and it's just like, what are you trying to do here? There's all this stuff going on, there's two love interests in it, it's like, let's see how much crap we can throw at this and try and make a decent film out of it, and they completely failed.
Yeah, I went to see Spider-Man 3 at the cinema, and I just remember being jaw agape at what was happening on the screen, because it was just absolutely ridiculous. I mean, I would have been quite happy if they'd have just had Venom as the main villain, and they could have made a film out of that, I'm sure. And to be honest, I like the Sandman, I think he's a good villain as well, but to chuck him in as well, it was just ridiculous, and they were all fighting for time, and it basically killed the franchise dead.
The problem was Spider-Man 3, so it needs 3 villains, and you're quite right, Venom on his own would have made a great film. I can't agree about the Sandman. I thought the Sandman bit was just so dull and such a pointless supervillain, or whatever he is, because he's a good man, but he's doing bad things, and I just didn't find him interesting at all. Being such a big fan of Spider-Man, and like you, I went to the cinema and sat there watching it, trying to force myself to like it, and I couldn't. It was awful.
Yeah, having just said what I said about going to the cinema to see Daredevil, I actually did go to the cinema to see Spider-Man 3 as well, and I've got a feeling it was on my birthday, so that makes it even worse.
Happy birthday.
Moving onwards, of course, every superhero must have a supervillain to go up against. We're going to chat briefly now about our favourite supervillains. I'll start us off with this one. We've not mentioned the X-Men much so far on the show, and my favourite villain, especially the later iteration played by Michael Fassbender, is Magneto. Magneto is a character that he has amazing powers compared to a lot of the other mutants. He has really incredible powers. He can manipulate anything metallic. His only really way he can be imprisoned is in the plastic tombs that you see him in 1 or 2 of the movies. And what makes him as a villain so great is that I wouldn't say he's a good guy. You could never really say with any comfort that he's a good guy, but certainly he's a conflicted villain. He wants to try and do what's best for his kind, which he sees as obviously mutants. Also, his relationship with Charles Xavier as well. I think that's a great relationship between those two. They're obviously arch enemies on a lot of occasions, but they've also got a lot of respect for each other, and in a lot of movies they of course do work together as well. So, Gordon, any thoughts on your favourite supervillain?
For me, it's pretty much anyone that Batman ever comes up against. Mainly the Joker, because he's the best villain in comics or film or anything. He's just absolute genius. If you forget the 60s TV show and the Batman and Robin pantomime, Batman has always been dark and shady, and his combatants even more so. Twisted, brutal, and above all else, they're all possible. They're not superheroes in the Marvel sense where they can fly or they can shoot lasers out of their eyes and things like that. These are all just people. In Batman's world, superheroes are just men who take a stand for justice, and the flip side of that is the enemies are just men driven by hate or a lack of compassion or whatever. I just love the believability that these are just people who turned bad. So any Batman villain is my favourite.
Matt, do you have any particular favourite supervillains?
Yeah, but before I talk about villains, I want to say what my problem with most superhero films is. And it's that they kill off the villains too easily. In the comics, a lot of these villains lasted for years and years. You know, people like Green Goblin was in the Spider-Man comics for like 10 years or something, and then he does sort of regenerate as being played by different characters and so on. But I just think they're too keen to kill off villains in the films because you have to have the hero winning at the end. It's not satisfying enough for the audience to just have the villain captured and put in jail. They have to kill him off. So that unfortunately then leaves the problem that all the best villains are eventually going to run out. So having said that, the Green Goblin in the first Spider-Man film, played by Willem Dafoe, was really good. He was obviously affected by the mutagen or whatever it was that turned him into the Green Goblin. But he had lots of character. He did a few wisecracks and things like that. And was also a bit of a nut job as well. So I would probably go for him.
Simon?
Well, after what I said about the films, it's going to have to be Lex Luthor. He's the archetypal gangster-type criminal, and he could be in any other era. He would be just up against the police and the FBI. But unfortunately for him, he happens to be up against Superman. He thinks he's amazing when he probably isn't actually that great a criminal. He's got all the underground lair under the railway station, and he's got a silly little psychic Otis who's absolutely nuts. He has the nice women come in occasionally, but he just thinks he's at the bee's knees. And Gene Hackman plays him excellently. I just think he just plays it really well. He's just a guy who thinks he can control the world when he can't really, and he just happens to be up against a superhero.
Lex Luthor is basically Donald Trump, isn't he? He's just a corrupt businessman. That's all he is, corrupt businessman with an inflated sense of self-importance. There's nothing going for him other than his own ego, and that's why he's such a good character.
Kevin Spacey played one of the other ones.
Yes, that was in Superman Returns. He was reasonably good, but he definitely lacked the gravitas that Gene Hackman had in the original, in my opinion, anyway.
I quite enjoyed that film. I mean, people say it's Batman and Robin level of dreadfulness, but it's not, is
What
it?
film are we talking about?
Superman Returns.
Oh, I liked Superman Returns.
I enjoyed it, and everyone just seems to slate it. It was better than Man of Steel.
Next up, The Other Guys. We're going to talk about our favourite alternative superhero movies. We just want to talk a little bit about superhero movies that perhaps aren't so well known or aren't based on comics. Anyone got any opinions on anything good that they like? Matt?
Well, there's one in particular that stands out from recent times. The film is called Super.
Batman, batarang, pipe bombs, utility belt.
Utility belt.
Green Arrow has a bow and arrow.
Okay.
Why do you need all those?
I'm making up my own superhero. He needs a weapon. That'll do.
Cool.
All it takes to be a superhero is the choice to fight evil.
Shut up, crime.
And the superhero is the Crimson Bolt. Rainn Wilson from the US office is the Crimson Bolt, and he's got a sidekick called Bolty, played by Ellen Page. It seems at first glance that it's played as a comedy. It's about a guy whose wife leaves him for a local drug dealer, who's played by Kevin Bacon, and decides to become a real-life superhero/vigilante to try and win back his wife's affections. But it actually becomes one of the most sort of uncomfortable black comedy/violent films you can possibly imagine. There's a particular scene early on where he's gone to the cinema, he's stood in line and someone cuts in the line in front of him and asks him to move, and he doesn't, so he goes back to his car, changes into his superhero costume, and then whacks the guy on the head with a wrench and beats him to a pulp. And I just think it's such a genius film, but also so unexpected. There's so many scenes in it that are just like, you think it's going to be a fairly straightforward comedy, and every 5 minutes something else happens. It's either sickening violence or this uncomfortable scene where his sidekick basically tries to rape him. It's just so weird and yet different and clever. And also ultimately it ends up quite tragic.
By the time this podcast is out, there'll be a mini review on the website of Super. Because I rewatched it a couple of days ago. I'd forgotten just how good it was. There's a couple of scenes in it that really, like you say, it's so violent in places. But there's one particular scene where he's bashing a bad guy's head against a fireplace, a corner of a fireplace that he keeps hitting his head against. And it's a long time since I felt physically sick watching a film, and this is a comedy. I think the word you used, Matt, was unexpected, and that's absolutely what makes this film so good, is because everything that happens is unexpected. And I've got to say, Ellen Page is absolutely fantastic in it. The scene that you mentioned, she plays it so well. I think that if they gave Oscars for B-movie films about crap superheroes, she'd be first in line to get one.
He has a great catchphrase as well, doesn't
he? Shut up, crime.
Okay, Gordon, have you got any alternative superhero movies for us?
Yeah, for me, it's Unbreakable.
Why are you looking at me like that? There are two reasons why I'm looking at you like this. One, because it seems you are the only survivor of this train wreck. And two, you don't have a scratch on you.
Despite using traditional comic book structuring and the standard dynamic of the hero versus the nemesis, the film's like the antithesis of a Marvel model of a superhero film. It's clever, it's dark, it's got a twist that's pretty obvious in hindsight, but when I actually watched it for the first time, it gave me the classic, oh shit, kind of moment. You know, I really should have known that was the twist, but I really didn't, and I really loved it. It's dark, you know. If I try and imagine any scene from it, all I can see is rain and darkness. I absolutely love the film. I haven't seen it in a long, long time, so I do need to watch it again. And I've got to say that Samuel L. Jackson is fantastic in it as well.
Yes. Simon?
I presume this counts as a superhero's. Blade is the one I was thinking of.
You better wake up. The world you live in is just a sugar-coated topple. There is another world beneath it. The real world.
I just think Blade as a superhero, he's unbeknown to a lot of people what he's doing to keep the world safe. He's obviously ridden the world of the vampires. It's very dark. There's a lot of different facets to the storylines, and I think he's a good character. And I think Wesley Snipes obviously plays him very well.
There's that iconic scene, I'm not sure whether it's in 1 or 2, you know, the disco scene.
Yeah.
That is absolutely fantastic. That's a scene that just stays with you. So, I love the Blade films too.
That scene showed it most of all. The way that the vampires die was quite original at the time. I think they died that way kind of in Buffy the Vampire Slayer, but not as violently. But before that, vampires were generally just kind of melted away, but for them to just like burst into flames and like the skeletons all flame up and everything was great.
I'm a big fan of Blade as well. I've never seen the sequel actually, but I love the first film, so that's an excellent choice. The alternative superhero movie that I'm going to mention is probably not a particularly popular one, and I didn't think it was a hugely brilliant film, but I'd like to mention a film called Hancock. About this movie, it's a comedy about basically a badly behaved superhero played by Will Smith called Hancock, funnily enough.
Hancock!
What, boy?
Bad guys!
Would you want a cookie? Tell out my face.
Jackass.
What?
You heard me?
The hook that got me on this movie was, whenever you watch any of these superhero movies, the traditional ones, inevitably there's big battles going on, etc, etc, and in the background there's buildings getting totaled, cars being smashed, God knows what sort of destruction happening as these battles goes on, and basically you can imagine the insurance claims and God knows what else going on in the background after all this has happened, and that's kind of the concept behind Hancock, that he's destroying buildings and he's held to task for this and sued by people because he's causing all this damage. And also there's an issue with alcohol as well in it, and I think the film kind of overplays those elements a little bit too much, but it has some good action in it, and it's about how this superhero Hancock tries to clean up his act. Not the best film in the world, but as an alternative type of superhero movie I enjoyed it a lot.
I don't remember it too well. I remember him being pissed up at the beginning and like smashing into cars and all that kind of
That's
stuff.
right, and that would actually lead into the next segment that we're going to talk about, which is what heroes or series you think could be made into a superhero film or possibly rebooted as well. My choice, I mentioned earlier about Iron Man being one of my favourite superhero movies. Iron Man's always been a very conflicted character, and there was a famous series in the Iron Man comic called Demon in the Bottle, which, as the name suggests, Iron Man, specifically Tony Stark, battles a very different type of villain himself and his addiction to alcohol. The alcoholism itself is kind of a backdrop for a lot of the story, which is general superhero fare as it proceeds over its, I think, 12 issues. But always in the background and seeping in different moments, there's the fact that Tony Stark is really battling against alcohol, and it kind of comes to a head towards the end of the story. Of course, you know, with superhero movies the way they are, it's highly unlikely they'll ever choose anything like this to conflict the character with. But I think it's one of the things that makes Iron Man such an intriguing character, or at least the man behind Iron Man anyway. Matt, do you have any ideas here?
Yeah, there was a comic series that I enjoyed when I was a kid. It was a 12-issue series in America, but I think they spanned it out over about 30 issues in the UK. And it's called Secret Wars. The reason I liked it when I was a kid was because it was a toy line as well. I had all the toys. It's basically a big mashup of all the superheroes. This otherworldly character called the Beyonder transports all the Marvel superheroes and villains onto this world that he's created and gives them access to whatever they need to fight against each other and just pits them against each other. It's got all the normal characters you'd expect: Spider-Man, the Avengers, the X-Men, Doctor Doom, Magneto. All those kind of characters are transported into this alternate universe almost and made to fight each other. Lots of things happen which I won't go into. The most significant thing that happens in it is that it's the origin of Spider-Man's black suit in the comics. It's the first time that appeared. It's given to him by the Beyonder, and he obviously doesn't know the impact of it till he gets back from this otherworldly battle. But what I thought was, this is surely where, if all the companies that own the various rights to the Marvel characters could get together, this is where all these different films could end up, is this one big battle between all the goodies and baddies. And what they could have is, at the end of each film that the different heroes appeared in, they could just have them vanish from existence with no explanation, and then maybe 2 or 3 years down the line they make this film that explains where they all vanished to, because apparently that's exactly what happened in the comics. People would be reading through the comic and go, oh my god, Spider-Man's just disappeared at the end of this, where's he gone? And then they did this Secret Wars thing. I don't think it'll ever happen, and it probably doesn't have a great plot for a film, but I still think it'd be a cool thing to try and do.
Yeah, definitely. I agree, though. It's probably unlikely to happen with all the franchises being owned by different studios, but I was a big fan of Secret Wars as well. I thought it was a great little mini-series. It was almost like a greatest hits of all the villains and the superheroes sort of all thrown together.
Yeah.
Gordon?
Well, at first I'll just say I've never heard of Secret Wars. It sounds interesting, but never heard of it. And to hear that there was a toy line as well, it really surprises me that I hadn't heard of it. But getting on to mine, firstly, The Rocketeer. Nazis, jetpacks, period costumes and vehicles, what's not to love? I think it's about time we got at least a sequel to The Rocketeer.
To Cliff Secord, it was just an innocent discovery.
I wouldn't touch that if I... How do I look? Like a hood ornament.
A discovery that will lead to the adventure of his life.
I want that rocket.
But the other thing I'd like to see is a live-action version of Tiger and Bunny, which is a Japanese anime TV series where superheroes are all sponsored by major corporations. So they've got like Amazon logos on them and World Bank and all sorts of stuff. And they battle out for points on a live TV show. So Hero TV broadcasts live around the city, and whenever anything's happening, a hero goes over, and whichever of them saves a human or stops a building collapsing, whatever, they get a certain amount of points. And then at the end of the year, one of them is crowned Hero of the Year. This is like in real life. These are real crimes going on. It's a TV series, but they've done 2 movies. These are animated movies. In the first movie, there's one bit where they've all got radios in their ear, these superheroes, and one of them's just about to stop a marauding villain. And he gets something in his ear to say, "We're just going to go to a commercial break. Can you hold off for 3 minutes?" It's such a good premise. The purity of being a hero is kind of sullied by big business and evil corporations. I think it's such a fantastic premise that it would make a brilliant live action film. Whilst I'm saying I'd love there to be a movie of it, I actually checked Wikipedia earlier today and it appears that there is going to be a movie of it. So at some point we are likely to see Tiger and Bunny the movie, but I'm pretty sure that for a UK or worldwide non-Japanese audience they'll change the name, because I'm not sure Tiger and Bunny is going to cut it.
Thank you, Gordon. Simon, have you got any things you'd like to see rebooted or stories told?
A character that's been around for years. Recently I took a bit of an interest to it and I started to read about him and what the whole story was about him in the comics. And that's Dan Dare, and I don't know whether that would translate into anything around the world or not. I don't know. He's a sort of spiffing, jolly good old chap and fights the Mekon and all different battles and bits and pieces. I just think that might be something they could look at. I don't know. I quite enjoyed the games when they were out years ago. So
I completely agree, Si. I think that's a really good call. I think Dan Dare would make a great film.
There was an alternative and short-lived British anthology comic called Revolver that came out a few years ago, and they had a updated, grittier version of Dan Dare as one of the strips in there. And I think if you'd looked at that, you'd think, yeah, maybe there might be some potential for a movie there, certainly.
While the possibilities of space travel beyond the moon remain a subject of scientific controversy, writers and artists give free rein to their imagination with stories that nevertheless bear the stamp of authenticity. And here are some of the ways that artist Frank Hampson captures the realistic atmosphere in his famous Dan Dare strip. In case you don't recognize this space monster, it's a Treen from the planet Venus, alias 8-year-old Peter Hampson. Just one of the artist's family who help out. Another is his father, better known to Dan Dare fans as Sir Hubert Guest, controller of the Interplanet Space Fleet.
So finally for this section, obviously superhero movies are very in vogue at the moment. There's a lot incoming. I'm just going to go around the table and ask everyone what they're looking forward to the most. And let's go with Matt first.
I think we watched the trailer a couple of episodes back. Captain America Civil War looks like the one I'd be most interested in. Once again, it's got the usual characters in. Iron Man. I'm not sure if Thor's in it, but if he's in it, then he's one of my preferred Marvel characters. Not a big fan of Captain America, but the fact that other heroes are going to be kicking his ass seems decent. And it's also got the return of Spider-Man, which should be interesting.
Thanks, Matt. Gordon, what are you looking forward to in particular?
It's definitely for me Suicide Squad. I've already said that I'm a big fan of the DC universe, and in particular its villains. So bringing together some of its worst bad guys and then sending them on covert missions for the government sounds absolutely amazing. I can't say I'm that excited by Will Smith as Deadshot, but I'm really keen to see what Jared Leto and Margot Robbie do as Joker and the Harlequin.
Myself, next week I'm going to see Deadpool, so I'm quite looking forward to that. I've managed to avoid seeing the trailer. I haven't seen anything about it, but I've heard good things, so I'm looking forward to seeing Deadpool next week. And then after that, Captain America Civil War. Simon, for you?
Obviously Batman vs Superman's coming, which is going to be quite interesting. I've not really looked into it as much as going to see it. 2 characters again, like Gordon says, I obviously love Superman from the old days. I do like Batman. As you got older, I still think Batman's more of an adult superhero, as you want to call it. Going to wait and see what that's about. And Suicide Squad, like Gordon said, that sounds interesting.
Just before we finish on superheroes, something we're going to throw in here. Obviously, a lot of superhero films are based on 2 different universes. You've got Marvel and you've got DC. Traditionally, these have always faced off against each other. I'm going to go around the MovieMuse team, and I'd like you to tell me which of your two is the favourite universes and why. So first, we're going to go with Gordon.
It's DC, and it's because they're believable characters. I see Marvel as comic books. I see DC as graphic novels. One's for kids, one's for grown-ups.
Okay, Matt?
I'll go on the opposite side of the fence. I always preferred Marvel when I was a kid. I'm not really interested in comics nowadays, or graphic novels for that matter. I find the DC heroes and villains a bit boring generally. I'm not really enthralled by Batman or Superman. Some of the villains are more interesting, but I find the Marvel characters a lot more engaging maybe. And yeah, they are all a bit silly and they are comic book, but that's what you want from superheroes really, I think.
Simon?
DC for me. Don't know a lot about Marvel. Don't follow the characters when I was younger. Batman and Superman, you can relate to them more than these crazy characters on the other sides. So yeah, for me it's DC.
Okay, I'm going to go with Marvel like Matt, really for the reasons that Gordon explained. I think that's the reason I like Marvel so much. The outlandish characters, it's not realistic, and it's just pure escapism. So Marvel for me, so that's 2 for DC, 2 for Marvel.
Oh, if only Pete was here.
He probably wouldn't make his mind up. Okay, thanks everyone. That wraps up our superhero section. With the Oscars and BAFTAs just around the corner, here's Gordon to give us an overview of these upcoming events.
Thanks, Graham. February is an exciting time for the movie industry, with the majority of its award ceremonies held, including the Screen Actors Guild, the British Academy Film Awards, and of course the Oscars. Every year, MovieMuse challenge ourselves to watch all the films nominated in the major categories for the BAFTAs and the Oscars, and to produce a report card for each of the academies, showing how they performed against the MovieMuse grade. This year, the list is 39 movies long, so there might be some red eyes by the time we get to the main event on the 28th of February with the American Academy. You can see last year's results in the award season section of MovieMuse.net, and over the next few weeks we'll be adding loads more content, much of which will probably be online by the time you're listening to this podcast. Across the team, we've got very different opinions on the relevance of the awards. I myself find them to be a bit too elitist and not particularly representative of the viewing public, but I still love this time of year when everyone's talking about movies and I get to watch tons of films that otherwise I wouldn't have heard of, never mind watch. We'll talk about the winners in next month's show, but for the time being, I'll just leave you with a few of our official MovieMuse hopes for the award season. Best Picture. In this category, we've gone for The Big Short. Any film that can teach you about financial legal loopholes by gratuitously putting Margot Robbie in a bubble bath is onto a winner. But The Big Short is actually the most fun a factual film could possibly be. For Best Director, we've gone for Alejandro Inarritu for The Revenant. It's a stunning film made in killer conditions. I'd hate to work for Inarritu, but I certainly appreciate the output of those who did. For Best Actor, again it's The Revenant and Leonardo DiCaprio. Leo must be odds on to finally get his Oscar this year, and this is the one he deserves. This is the performance of his lifetime. In Best Actress, it's Saoirse Ronan for Brooklyn. This was probably the hardest category to pick, and I could easily have gone for Brie Larson in Room, but I plumped for a performance that builds from clueless innocence to strong will as the film goes on. And finally, for Best Original Score, we've chosen Ennio Morricone for The Hateful Eight. Despite his dislike of Tarantino's methods and his reuse of material from the cutting room floor, notably using unused tracks from the Thing score and a theme from The Exorcist 2, Morricone has come up trumps, and like DiCaprio, this should finally be the year where he gets the Oscar that he richly deserves. Although unlike Leo, Hateful Eight isn't his lifetime's best, it's just the best of the year.
Every month, one of our MovieMuse crew chooses one of his favourite movie scenes. This month, it's Matt's turn. What have you got for us?
I have chosen a scene from Lord of the Rings Return of the King, The Charge of the Rohirrim. Obviously there's a lot of great scenes in the Lord of the Rings trilogy, and there's quite a few that tug on the heartstrings and bring a few tears, but this is probably the only scene in any film I've ever watched that brings tears to my eyes through sheer power of the scene rather than any kind of emotional connection to the characters. Plot wise, it's a pivotal moment in the film as the battle for Minas Tirith swings in favour of the good guys. It's also a moment of redemption for King Theoden, who'd been slightly embarrassed by the decisions he made in the Battle of Helm's Deep in the Two Towers. I also like the fact that they actually went out and filmed this properly. They got over 150 riders, extras on horseback, and got them to charge down a hill. Obviously they then enhanced it with CGI for the final film, but it would have been an amazing sight even with 150 riders. But the thing I like most about it is the bravery of thousands of men who know that they're probably going to die, but they're willing to follow their king into battle anyway, and the reaction of the orcs when they realise there's no enemy more terrifying than one that isn't afraid to die.
Form ranks, you maggots! Form ranks! Pikes in front! Archers behind!
Hey, man! Take your area down the left flank! Gamling, follow the King's banner down the center. Remote, take your company right after you pass the wall. Forth, and fear no darkness! Arise! Arise, riders of Theoden! Spears shall be shaken! Shields shall be splintered! A sword day! A red day! And the sun rises!
Whatever happens, stay with me. I'll look after you.
Right now! Right now! Right! Right for ruin and the world's ending!
Our next segment is Film Club, and last month Gordon chose the Kevin Bacon thriller Cop Car. So I'll hand over to Gordon to tell us a little bit about his choice before we all give our thoughts on the movie and a rating out of 5.
Cop Car is a tale of two young kids who find an abandoned cop car in the woods and decide to take it for a ride. Kevin Bacon plays the local sheriff who the car belongs to, and he's got to get the car back at all costs because he's got some incriminating evidence in the trunk. And that's about it for your plot, really. So why did I choose Cop Car? I love the way the film captures the innocence of the kids as they get deeper and deeper into something that they don't understand, juxtaposed with the desperation of the sheriff as he gets more and more concerned that his secret's going to be exposed. I think visually the film's great. It depicts a believable, sleepy Midwest town. The performances are high quality. Bacon's brilliant. The child actors both play their parts very differently, and I think when you get child actors, they play it exactly the same because they're both young, they're both learning, and they're both trying to outdo each other maybe, I don't know. But these two play two very different children, and I think that works really well. It's a short film, but that stops the tension waning, it avoids the need for dragged out backstories. I absolutely loved the film, so I'm hoping that everybody else did, and I would give it 4.5 stars.
Okay, thank you, Gordon. Matt, what did you think of Cop Car?
I thought it was an interesting story, and the acting performances, as Gordon has said, were all good. What I really liked about it was it almost felt like it was set in the 70s. It had a real sort of 70s vibe with like this sort of slightly overexposed cinematography. You got the old school cars and the costumes, like the sheriff's outfit and what the kids were wearing. It could have all been set in the 70s, and the only thing that places it in more modern times was the fact they used cell phones, really. It's interesting that it was part of a larger story with no explanation whatsoever given of the events preceding the start of the film or really what happens after it. The kids in it were really dumb, you know, they were proper stupid. It's almost cringeworthy to see them playing with those guns, and the only reason they don't shoot each other is because the safeties are on, they don't know how to switch them off. The ending was clever, but also a bit frustrating. It's clever, obviously it's open to interpretation, but it's a bit frustrating that you don't really get a resolution of the story and leaves a lot of unanswered questions. So because it was a bit uneven in the storytelling, I'm going to go for 3 stars.
Harsh.
Okay, thank you. Simon?
It was good. The only thing that did annoy me is that Kevin Bacon leaves his car keys in the car and doesn't lock it. I think if I had a dead body in the boot, I think I'd actually lock it up. No matter whether I'm in the middle of the woods or not, I don't think I'd leave the key in it and leave the door open. But that would have been a silly story because it would have only lasted 5 minutes. But it was good. I enjoyed it. Again, it was suspense. You didn't know how it was going to end. You didn't know what was going to go on. But like Matt said, it was uneven with unanswered questions at the end. It just sort of ended. And I'm like, okay. But it was a good film. So I'll give it 4 out of 5.
Yeah, it's a typical film like this which doesn't really know how to end properly, and then it just doesn't really end. I watched it on Blu-ray. I bought the Blu-ray quite cheaply off Amazon, and like Gordon says, it looks fantastic. The movie really does. The fact that it's only 85 minutes long and the plot is quite simple is no problem whatsoever to me because it's tightly packed and it tells its story very, very well. I think that the most intriguing part to me was the character of Kevin Bacon, the cop, because the character itself, without trying to give away too much, it kind of veers a little throughout the film. There's obviously the desperation as he's trying to find out what's happened to his car, and it's quite clever the way he manipulates the situation. Obviously it helps being the sheriff so that he can talk to the kids directly without anyone listening. There's a couple of twists in it involving the children, which kind of means his character morphs a little bit towards good guy territory in it. But generally it's an excellent film, very well shot. Kevin Bacon is as watchable as ever, and the kids are also excellent in it. I would give this a solid 4.5 out of 5. Excellent choice, Gordon.
Thank you. Just before we move on, Pete couldn't be with us today, but through the magic of modern technology, he's sent his score, and Pete gave it 3.5 stars.
You boys sure gave me a fright.
So that's Cop Car done. Excellent choice, Gordon, as I say. Our next choice for Film Club is up to Simon. What have you got for us, Simon?
What I've chosen is a sort of 80s comedic horror, I suppose. It's more horror than comedy, I should think. It's The Reanimator.
This is not an advertisement for a new movie. This is a warning. If you are squeamish, if you have nightmares, if you have a weak heart, before you experience Reanimator, think very carefully. H.P. Lovecraft's classic tale of horror, Reanimator. It will scare you to pieces.
It's a 1985 American film. I remember watching it as a kid, and it was just something shocking to us at the time. It's just something you always remember when you're growing up. Everyone was talking about The Reanimator or Creep Show or Scanners and all those kind of films. It's the sort of something that stands out in my mind from when I was growing up. And then I thought, well, it might be worth revisiting it and just seeing what was all the fuss was about at the time. So hopefully we'll see what we all think about it next time.
So before we round up things, sad to report that we lost 2 great British acting talents in January. First of all, on the 10th of January, David Bowie passed away, mostly known of course for his music, but also starred in many films, most famously the children's classic Labyrinth. And also Alan Rickman, who died just a few days later on the 14th. And here's Matt to tell us a little bit about this esteemed thespian.
Thank you, Graham. Alan Rickman was born in London in 1946, studied at the Royal College of Art and began his working life as a graphic designer. He turned to acting in 1972 and attended the Royal Academy of Dramatic Art before becoming a member of the Royal Shakespeare Company. He appeared in many theatrical productions on stage and TV before making his big break in the stage production of Les Liaisons Dangereuses in 1985, for which he was nominated for a Tony Award. Moving from theatre to the big screen, he became known as a versatile actor, equally at ease in Hollywood blockbusters and independent cinema. He played romantic leads in dramas such as Sense and Sensibility and Truly Madly Deeply, comedic roles in Galaxy Quest and Dogma, provided memorable voices in The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy and Alice in Wonderland, and won a Golden Globe and an Emmy for his portrayal of the Mad Monk in the TV biopic Rasputin, Dark Servant of Destiny. Of course, he will be best remembered for his portrayal of some of the most delightfully unpleasant characters in movie history, including Professor Snape in the Harry Potter saga, the Sheriff of Nottingham in Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, and one of the most influential villains of all time, Hans Gruber in Die Hard, a role that redefined action movie villains as charming, intelligent tacticians, which was copied but never bettered in the many action films that followed. He died of pancreatic cancer on the 14th of January at the age of 69, and his passing was greeted with positive tributes from the many stars, young and old, that he worked with during his career. He may have often played an unsympathetic character on screen, but he was one of the most well-liked off the camera. His final film role was the voice of Absalom the Caterpillar in Alice Through the Looking Glass, which will be released in May.
For three of the best, we're going to go around and talk about our three favourite Alan Rickman movies. So let's start off with Simon.
For me, it's Professor Snape in Harry Potter films. I think he played it excellently. I read the books and he transgressed straight across. He's obviously done his research and he plays the character excellently. My favourite one of all of them is Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince, the climax, and then he becomes quite instrumental in the next two after that, obviously, with Deathly Hallows Part 1 and 2. But I think as the films went on, his character came to the fore, and I think that's my favourite part of Alan Rickman's filmographies.
Thank you, Simon. Matt?
In third place, I'm going to go for the Sheriff of Nottingham in Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, if only for the line where he's cancelling Christmas. Second place, Galaxy Quest. I can't actually remember the name of the character off the top of my head, but he showed that he was equally adept at comedy as any of the other roles that he did. It was brilliant at pretty much everything he did, and that was probably his best comedic performance. And number one, Hans Gruber in Die Hard, the best action film villain of all time.
Well, I would agree with two of your choices. I would certainly agree with Die Hard and Galaxy Quest. I think he's superb in both of those movies, although very different roles, like you say. My third choice might be a little bit unusual. It's a film called Blow Dry, a small British film about a hairdressing competition in a town up north in the UK. It's not the greatest film, but Rickman, as usual, is brilliant in it in a more comedic role again, and he faces off against Bill Nighy in the aforementioned hairdressing competition, and as usual, he gives an excellent performance. It's well worth checking out. Gordon?
Firstly, I think you'll find it's Oop North, not Up North.
Sorry, I stand corrected.
My favourite three Rickman films then. In third, I've gone with Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. The only good thing about this god-awful film is Rickman's brilliant portrayal of Marvin the Paranoid Android. Second, I've gone for all of the Harry Potter films. There was always more to Snape than met the eye if you read the books, and I thought Rickman gave a wonderful portrayal of a complex character that you just knew was going to ultimately be as important as the lead characters in the books and films. Despite of what people might think of Harry Potter being kid stuff and all of that, he played it superbly. Top, very predictably, it's Die Hard. Hans Gruber gave 80s action villains style and poise rather than guns and brawn, and he'll always be remembered as one of the best bad guys in film.
Next up, we have our classic score section, which this month is being chosen by Gordon.
Okay, my choice is, let's hope that I can pronounce this correctly. It's typical that the one month when we haven't got our German-speaking compadre with us is the month that I need to speak German. So my choice for classic score is Die Unendlich Geschichte, which most of us will know as The Never-Ending Story. I'm a big fan of The Never-Ending Story. Both the film and the soundtrack bring back great memories of Sunday nights sitting in front of a 3-bar fire, wrapped in a towel after my bath before school, and watching a grainy VHS from the video shop that's been hired out so many times that the audio's all warbled and there's snowy lines regularly running across the screen. Klaus Doldinger from German jazz group Passport wrote an orchestral score for the original German release of the film, but for the worldwide release, Giorgio Moroder was brought in to rescore a number of tracks, adding his trademark electropop feel. Moroder also wrote a new main theme, which became a top 10 hit around the world for Kajagoogoo frontman Lamal and American singer Beth Anderson. Neither the new arrangement of the score nor the theme song were included in the German release, and I really recommend you get hold of a copy of the film in its original form as Die Unendlich Geschichte. The more dramatic score gives a new feel to some of the scenes, and the lack of Moroder's pop hit, which I personally love as a song in its own right, removes a lot of the cheese that was spread over pretty much every American film from the 80s. So, to play out this month's show, I've chosen the main theme from Die Unendlich Geschichte, the original German release of Wolfgang Petersen's classic 80s film, The Never-Ending Story.
That about wraps it up, folks, for this episode. Thanks to my fellow MovieMuse crew, and of course to all of you out there who have taken time to download or listen to this. Now to tell you about next month's MovieMuse is Simon. What have we got in store for episode 5?
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Gripper, sir. In honour of the impending release of Red Dwarf Series 11 and the filming of Red Dwarf 12, we're invoking Space Corps Directive 14768/C, sir. All things Red Dwarf must be discussed, analysed and regurgitated in interesting, witty and informative discourse, while divulging such interesting facts as our favourite episodes, favourite scenes and dialogue, favourite series, character, villains and monsters, and any other interesting facts about the Big Red One. So I hope you will join us for what should be a very smegtastic podcast. So we hope to see you then. Smoke me a kipper. I'll be back for podcast.
Brilliant.